I used to love to read books, and the stranger the book, the more I liked it. I was a bibliophile and I collected books, particularly ones that purported to open the reader to some new experience. I digested books about UFOs and ghosts, telepathy, spontaneous human combustion, close encounters, Atlantis, Nazis on the moon, all of that kind of thing. In the same way that other people digest chocolate or coffee. My problem was I'd read it all. I'd exhausted the shelves of my local library's esoteric section a long time ago. My Kindle was full and Amazon had nothing new for me, so I was starting to despair. Like anyone with a habit, I needed a hit. My uncle's death, unlikely as it seems, became the catalyst that would open up a whole new vista of books to me. I wasn't close to my uncle, but I needed to attend his funeral. I own one suit, a black one, which works for weddings and funerals. But I'd only just used it for a black tie event, and it needed dry cleaning. The only dry cleaner I could find was a drive across town in an area I didn't have much call to visit very often. So I dropped off my suit and was told I could have it cleaned while I waited. I opted to take a wander around the neighborhood and get some fresh air while the suit was being dry cleaned, which was when I stumbled on the old bookstore. The sign was barely noticeable, just a pointing hand with the words "Second-Hand Books," with the lettering so faded that the C in second and first O of books were missing, and the illustrated finger of the hand pointing down some rickety old stairs into a basement. It was dark and dank, but filled with that wonderful, musty odor of old books, the smell of decades, of countless owners, of fingers rifling through pages and consuming the words thereon, the smell of imagination and worlds as yet unknown. The store owner looked up from his book and nodded at me. "Hello," I smiled. He watched me for a while, and then went back to his book, presumably content that I didn't look like I intended to shoplift his stock. So here was a store almost entirely dedicated to esoteria. Books on Bigfoot, alien abduction, demonology, Wiccan magic, ancient alien symbolism, and shamanism. A wonderful place, but of course, I'd read almost everything there. Most of them I'd read more than once. The store owner watched me pick up volume after volume and must have noticed the look of vague frustration on my face. "Find anything you like, sir?" I smiled, patting a volume of The Shaman's Toolkit by Sandra Ingerman. "Yes. No. Well, all of this is of interest to me, but I'm afraid I've read rather a lot, and I've read all of these. Some nice first editions you have here, though." Something seemed to happen to his face. That saying their eyes lit up has a basis in truth. His really did. They sparkled as though some flame had been kindled somewhere in that shadowy store. "I think I can help," he said, and ushered me towards a door at the back of the shop. One I'd overlooked and assumed was for employee use only. He opened the door onto a treasure trove. "I usually save these for more discerning customers, but I think I can see you fit the bill." He gestured for me to enter, and enter I did, and didn't emerge for about 2 hours. He even brought me coffee while I browsed. I was enchanted. Here were works I had heard of mentioned in other volumes, but works so rare and unlikely that they were usually alluded to only as fictional or as the invention of rumor and of myth. Many were written in foreign tongues, a great deal were written in languages I didn't recognize. Others still were old lithoprints of cuneiform, whose pages were entirely formed of pictographs printed directly from Babylonian and Sumerian stelae. The store owner saw me leafing feverishly through these and nodded. "You're interested in ancient etymology, I see. Try this one." He reached up to a shelf I hadn't gotten to yet, pushed aside a pile of tomes under whose great weight the shelf was sagging, and pulled out a small red volume. Thin and unimpressive to look at, but with gold-edged pages and an integral satin bookmark, which suggested something interesting. I took the book, studied for a moment the mascara in relief gurning grotesquely at me from the cover, and opened to the first page. The Etymologist's Glossology of Wordian Ostiaries, an exploration of Obiist, Norse, and Sumerian wedge form and runic portals. That's quite a title, I noted. Quite a book, he said, and passed me a pair of rubber-ended tweezers. I examined the inside, turning the feather-thin pages with their sharp gilt edges using the tweezers. The paper crackled like autumn leaves. Tiny lettering on each page had been printed in the traditional way so that the text was uneven, the ink blotted, and sometimes difficult to read. There were illustrations, too. Hideous, terrifying pictures depicting scenes that would send Escher and Dante screaming into the night. My search was over. Suddenly, that cramped room, moments before a delight to my senses, was now no more than dead weight. I'd found what I was looking for. The rest I would come back for another time. How much do you want for this? It's not technically for sale. He started to wring his hands. I just thought you'd like to see it. Well, you thought wrong. I want to buy it. Name your price. Yes, but I don't... Seriously. Name your price. I'll make no bones about it. I need this book in my life. And you have to sell it to me. So how much are you going to make me pay? His eyes started to shift around the room. I've got a lovely collection of Akkadian logographics, if you'd rather. This one here was in the collection of Ulrich IV himself. Well, not this edition, but look. I rose to my full height, which was a good foot higher than his, and prodded him in the chest with my finger. This is a bookshop. This is a book. You are in the business of selling books, and I am in the business of buying them. I wish to buy this book. I can't make it any clearer than that. But this isn't just any old book. No, somehow I understood that. Which may be why I simply had to own it. That's apparent enough, I nodded. How much? And so it went on, for a good half an hour. He left and returned twice because I refused to leave until he sold me the book. He even threatened to call the police. Which was the point at which I made him an offer he couldn't refuse, as a Corleone might say. He caved, and I wrote a check for an exorbitant amount and left the store with my prize under my arm. I went straight home, relishing the moment, wanting to make it last. I took a shower, hung up my now cleaned suit, made myself a pot of tea, and then went straight to my study, and straight to my easy reading chair by the circular window. The light there is perfect, and in late afternoon the sun streams through, so that motes of dust drift above me. I took out a pair of ornamental tweezers, which I keep for such a purpose, and started to peel the pages of the magnificent book apart. I read and read until the end, and then I started from the beginning and read again. It was mesmerizing, a work of pure genius. Not just a book, but an instruction manual. The vast majority dealt with the origins of the modern alphabet. Modern, as of the time of writing, which must have been pre-Victorian. The letters we know are derivatives, poor copies really, of the original cuneiform of Indo-Europe, a dialect and a written pictographic form given to the people by the gods themselves. The horizontal, vertical, and diagonal bars of each letter, which would later inspire the best reductionist version known to the world, that of the Norse Futhark rune, matched the same dimensional strands of the yeared lattice. That otherworldly realm from which the spiritual avatars of the ancient gods came. This multi-dimensional realm, when seen from the perspective of physical space, appeared two-dimensional, and using the complexity of runes it was possible to match the vertices where strands met, and connect physical to metaphysical. A letter was a coordinate, unique, precise. When combined into word form, the letter pinpointed not only a place within the lattice, but opened a multi-dimensional doorway. Combined words then opened up many doorways, and invoked spiritual essences from those locations within the yeared, giving power and evocation to the overall energy of the text. Runes, in their most basic form, that of the Futhark, are capable of unlocking vast depositories of power, and calling upon beings beyond imagining, eldritch entities who languish in their own worlds far removed from that of the one we know here and now. The modern alphabet is a convolution and in many ways a corruption of the Futhark, and draws more on the combined power of many coordinates, stealing small particles of those mighty spirits, in order to create powerful modes of world-changing magic. Words have power, which was something I had always known, but had never truly contemplated until this slender red volume made it all so clear to me. Through the written word, be they fictional or non-fictional, a simple man transcends his own limitations, and is capable of inspiring those who connect with his arrangement to move mountains, slay millions, or destroy worlds. At this point, I laid down the slender red book and drew out one of my most prized possessions. A first-edition copy of Mein Kampf, signed by Rudolf Hess, and marked with a roughly sketched swastika which the seller had assured me was penned by the author himself. As I traced the huge lettering on the cover with my finger, my eye wandered to the large Bible I keep on the lowest shelf of my study, its thickness bound in white leather, the words Holy Bible picked out in gold script on the immense spine. The written word was not merely a way to express language, but a means to mold reality. The runes, the logographic pictograms of the ancients, given to them by the gods of the Yird, the angular wedge forms of the ancient Greece, the Norse Futhark, and the modern alphabet with its string of 26 letters. But also the numerical range, 0 to 9, and symbolism, the swastika, the cross, the singularity, the full stop. All these things are potent ingredients with which to unlock the threshold between worlds. The book, as I have mentioned, was an instruction manual. It explained not only the purpose of words, of letters, and of logographic symbology, but the ways in which the reader might quickly and easily use runes and letters to open the way to the Yird. The book warned that the Yird is a strange place, stranger than a human mind can contemplate. Therein live entities whose minds are unfathomable and deeper than the long years of the earth. Many care not for humanity or the petty trivialities of what we consider to be all-consuming. Some find us amusing, others are intrigued, and then there are the rare few whose minds are close enough to our own to wish to possess what we possess, and to control what we control. Ourselves, our world, our destiny, our free will. These are the spiritual avatars: Odin, Ea, Enki, and Enlil, Thor and Loki, Zeus and Yahweh. They are known as gods or God, the devil and demons. They are the lesser, in fact, of the walkers of the spirit world, but upon us their influence is immense. When we use the runic form of these beings and open the door between worlds, we invite them into our lives, and if we are not prepared, we invite them to take that which we should retain only for ourselves. Only if we can find a victim to take our place can we escape these monsters who prey on physicality, another body to distract them with the alluring scent of its innocence, while we make our escape. I was reminded of the mysteries of occultism surrounding the Nazis, how Hitler became obsessed with Mein Kampf, how he seemed to acquire a strange charisma after his imprisonment, how his obsession with the Jewish people could be linked to ancient Aryan myths surrounding the cult centers of two ancient gods, how the apparent deranged ambitions of that one man seemed to then cascade into an entire nation, and then an entire world, leading to atrocity after atrocity. Nazism and the last World War have been called the Second Odinic Experiment. For the first time, that phrase seemed to kindle meaning in my mind. Could it be that Odin himself had passed through the letters of Mein Kampf and possessed the mind of Hitler? Could it be that Odin had inspired Mein Kampf? Were the Jewish people merely unwitting patsies to distract the hungry gods of woe while Adolf made his escape, and wallowed untroubled in the mire of power and wealth? These were mere thoughts, follies of a wandering imagination that paled into insignificance compared with the more serious business of learning the techniques outlined in the book. I found meditation easy, and could slip without much trial into the trance-like states required in order to trace the runes precisely. Learning the hideously complex modes of cuneiform was a much harder task and took me a long time, nearly a year in all, during which time frame I became a recluse. I even missed my uncle's funeral. Finally, I was ready to take the final test and enter the Yard, to explore the spirit world of those other beings. I was terrified, but also excited. What would I see? What would it be like? I could barely suppress my anxiety to achieve that final goal, and my hands shook as I held the pen I would use to scribe the runes needed to open the way. But as the ink on the page dried and I emerged from my trance state, a thick despair began to settle on my shoulders. There had been no journey into another dimension. I had seen nothing, felt nothing. The runes were there, but I was there too. The book had failed me, or I had failed the book. Perhaps there was an esoteric other realm, but if there was, I was apparently unworthy to dwell there. So I retired to my bed, exhausted, frustrated, and wondering if the whole thing had not simply been some kind of illusion. I slept. And so it began, a lucid dream, as real to the mind as waking reality. I awoke to find myself in a bizarre place of Gothic structures, obsidian towers, and jagged, peaked mansions, all beneath a purpling sky filled with churning clouds. All about me were cathedral avenues and immense vaulted ceilings, all ruined and broken as though some cataclysmic war had ravaged everything to its foundations. But there was no logic or meaning to the place. The avenues merged into one another. Chambers lay open to the dark sky with apparently no ordained purpose. Windows opened into other rooms, and stairwells wound upward around needles of stone, destined for thin air. Everything was gray stone and shadow, and at first I took the crouching forms squatting on plinths and on high shelves and balconies for gargoyles, leering down with bug eyes on that strange city with its formless roads and pointless ruins. But then I saw they were not gargoyles, but inhabitants. The people of this place, as strange and apparently purposeless as the walls upon which they were arrayed. I walked through the meandering streets, over the irregular cobbles, tripping and stumbling. Eyes always on the heights above, and the pot-bellied, grotesque, hunched-like deformed toads on their corbels. They paid me no heed and moved very little, except to shuffle on their perch, or turn this way and that, to gaze one way or the other across the endless tumbled ruins. I entered one of those ruins, an immense hall of pillars. I climbed stone stairs that took me to the high wooden mezzanines where I encountered many hundreds of the hideous imps, clustered in great crowds, hunkered on window ledges and gathered together in the eaves where their eyes glittered like candle flame. And here I encountered the others, larger than the gargoyles and more atrocious to the eye. They were similarly toad-like, or angelic, but with great sweeping horns and malevolence etched into the faces, as grim and weather-worn as the granite forests in which they lurked. As my eyes grew accustomed to the shadow world within the colossal building, I saw that places I had mistaken for outcrops of broken wall or deepness of shadow were in fact other beasts, languid and vile, rolling like fat, witchetty grubs in black soil nests, their many eyes watching me, their many mouths gumming away at the dim air. Through this patchwork hell of fiends I staggered until I came upon an archway that led onto high balconies, which in turn took me to a sweeping stairwell of cracked marble, and then back down into the city streets. Thus did the dream proceed. lucid and real as the starkest moment of my waking life. And the trauma of my journey through the city of fiends was as real too, as any suffered by any waking man who had ever experienced hell on earth. I would like to say that I awoke in a cold sweat, fetched myself a glass of water, and recovered my senses. But that wasn't my fate. Instead, the dream prevailed and prevailed, and time passed as it passes in the universe of logic and reason. And it passed, and it passed, and there in the city I remained. Long hours passed into what I guessed must be a day. No sun rose or set. The sky remained bleak, and the city terrifying. I walked, seemingly forever, and never did my surroundings change much, though no one corner of that ruined place was in any way like its neighbor. I felt no hunger, or need for sleep, only terror, and a desire to escape the city. But as the time I measured as a day turned into what must surely have been 2, and then 3, and then a week, I realized that the city had no end, and that as long as I walked it would pass beneath my feet, and surround me on all sides, and my only company would be all the fiends who watched and waited for the devil only knew what. Weeks became months, long and torturous, and then, without warning, the dream wound to an end. I was sitting at the time on a stone bench, decorated with the most macabre depiction of monstrous faces. Lumbering horrors who paid me no heed were marching by on their way to some unknown destiny when all of a sudden, my eyes opened and I blinked into the light of a normal morning. I was in my bed, awake. The dream had ended. I felt like a traveler returned from some epic quest, though the time on my phone, the date on the calendar, and the familiarity of my house all told me that only one night had passed. My relief that morning was tempered by the onset of what I knew must be a form of post-traumatic stress. My hands shook and sweat beaded on my face. I scoured the pages of the red book for some clue as to why I had suffered this hideous nightmare, but my only conclusion was that somehow I had misscribed the runes the day before and somehow opened myself to some kind of accidental incarceration within an enclosed part of the yard. As the afternoon grew long, I forced down some dinner and realized that I must face the reality of my bed. I managed to put off sleep until the middle of the next morning, but then my eyelids drooped as I pored over the pages of the red book, and once again, I fell asleep. I returned to the city and the lucid dream. Of that second period there is little to tell. I dwelled among the voiceless gargoyles, demons and giant beasts for what I guessed must be a year, if not more. Despair and insanity claimed me both, and when finally I emerged from the dream for a second time, I was a different man. Another day was spent in reality, though I barely recognized reality for what it was. I gnawed on food like some kind of caveman, squatting feral and maddened in my kitchen, wild-eyed and terror-stricken. I hid beneath the table and screamed at the sound of my own ringtone. As darkness came with the setting sun, I curled up in my nest and slipped once again into the city and another endless period outside of time. This time I was in the city for many, many years. There is no way to count them, for the city was without order. No one thing performed its life in any one way from one moment to the next. Like birds devoid of the need to hunt for food or mate, or make their nest to shelter from the elements. The monsters merely existed. They simply were, and my place among them seemed as pointless as their own presence. During those long years, or were they decades, I walked the endless streets and never once saw the same place twice. I surmised that here was a city covering all the world, but really it was much more. This was a dimension covering an eternity. I knew I might walk until my legs were worn to nubs and still never come to the curtain wall of the city, never see the greenery of a tree or feel the softness of grass underfoot. It was solitary confinement within a world I assumed must be formed of my own imagination. Fear never left me, but I did grow accustomed to every new, twisted face that passed me, to the stench that seemed to form the thickness of the air, and to the irrationality of the city itself, its permanent post-war ruination, and the disparate senselessness of its denizens. I awoke in my bed, but this time endeavored to either find a cure or take my own life before bed. So I had a day, and only a day. There was no way I could go through another minute of the City of Fiends, and I guessed that if the last trip had taken decades, the next would take a lifetime, if not longer. And so I invested every ounce of my being into the book and the runes that I had written. Like a condemned man who must pore through a library of law books in search of the one clause that will rescue him from the noose, I allowed my search to consume the seconds and forced a sharpness into my mind that few men who have not faced the fate that I faced could possibly achieve. And I found the answer. I screamed and laughed until tears streamed down my face. I was exonerated, released from my fate. Death could wait, and I would see through the night to come in a land of Nod more befitting of a human being. I had scribed one rune incorrectly, and opened within my home and my own brain a doorway into the realm known as the Empire of Ertol, as described in the Babylonian epics of Sumu Abum, a mortal man who purported to have dwelled there himself for many lifetimes. I pitied him, but had no time for sympathy. I had only one road to redemption left open to me. I had to choose either that road or an infinity within the City of Fiends trapped in my sleeping mind. To my shame I took the road, but I would sooner live with the most crippling shame than return to the realm of Ertol. This phrase would be my salvation. Gunshal Ertol Thalpa Yib Kadesh. You will recall that the only way to escape the binding debt a shaman who walks the roads of those eldritch entities of other realms may employ is to find another who will take his place. My error was great, and though I did not know it when I scribed the original runes, I had indebted myself to a deity known as Ertol, and to him I needed to give recompense. My presence within his city was an amusement to him. He would only allow me to escape and remain forever in the mortal world if I sent into his lair many more than my own essence was worth. Dear reader, you have read the phrase, and absorbed its essence into your mind. You, and those few who stumble upon my tale. With luck, enough of you will have read this story, that at least 6 or perhaps 7 see and read the letters arranged above. If one of them is you, I am so sorry for what you now face, when your eyes close tonight and you drift into a world that I could not endure. Maybe you will be stronger than I. The words I used will not work for you. They are specific to me. Your only hope is to find the book, to decipher its meaning, and scribe your own trickery. Only then will Ertol yield your sleeping dreams and return what rightfully belongs to you in the essence of your soul.